Go ahead and get started. A couple people still coming in, but we'll get started this afternoon. Hello. First of all, we are so glad every single one of you are here today. Of course, actually our panelists and Susan, but everybody who made it out this afternoon. It's a beautiful day. And hopefully you can still get out and enjoy some of it when you get home. My name is Chris Olson. I'm a member and current president of the League of Women Voters Roseville area. The program today is brought to you by the Roseville Area League as well as Do Good Roseville and our three sister Ramsey County leagues, Brighton, St. Paul, and White Bear Lake area. I want to ask before we go forward, how many of you are a member of the League of Women Voters? Any chapter? Good number of us. Great. Okay, well, if you aren't familiar with the League, we are a volunteer grassroots civic organization with 106 years, as of yesterday, of experience educating, advocating, and working toward reforms to make our democracy work for all. If you're interested in learning more about the League, please stop by our informational table, which is near the entrance, and visit with Ann Toney, who's our membership chair. Our topic today is freedom of speech and is especially timely and important. Our program is moderated by Roseville Area League member and attorney, Susan Johnson, and we are joined by three respected community panelists who will offer their constitutional understanding of freedom of speech, examine its legal implications, and discuss how it's applied in practice. Finally, questions. I want to just make sure everyone knows that we have a couple people in the room that will be roving around and can hand you a card. So if you have a question and if you need a pen, let us know, but write that up on a card and then we'll see that Susan gets that when we get to that portion of the program. So just raise your hand if you have a question and we'll get you a card. And with that, without any further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Susan. Thank you.
My panelist there is my expert on the microphone. Okay, so it's not working. Yeah, I didn't know. Was working a short video.
It worked before we started.
Test. All right, this one is going strong. Thank you for being here. I think to start off, I will read the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. I think as we're going to learn today, freedom of speech is often in the eyes of the beholder, and it's not free. It comes at a cost. To help us delve into what these costs are and what is allowable under freedom of speech and what isn't, we have panelists in the area of education, journalism, and law. I'm going to have each of the panelists introduce themselves and tell you a bit about the work that they do and how the First Amendment impacts their day-to-day work in the trenches.
Thank you, Susan. My name is Maura Wyant. I am an associate superintendent in Roseville Area Schools. And I first want to thank the League of Women Voters in Roseville for how supportive they have been of our district. We appreciate the advocacy and the pro-democracy work that they do because that's what we do in schools as well. I think of public education. We could say that it is the foundation of democracy, or democracy is inversely the foundation of public education. What we do every day that relates to the freedom of speech is allow expression of ideas. We are at the cornerstone of our work developing critical thinkers that listen and learn and hopefully are willing to develop and change their opinion when presented with new information. And the freedom of speech is so important in that because Silenced views don't stay silent. They just go underground. And that's when we lead, to me, to polarization. So we are really an institution that wants to promote discussion and development of ideas to support all of us as citizens in a democratic society.
Hello, everyone. I'm Charlie Weaver, the executive director and co-publisher of the Minnesota Daily and the project manager of MNNN, which is the Metro Nonprofit News Network. It's a small coalition of nonprofit startups that emerged because they lost their local newspapers. In regard to the First Amendment and the work that we do as journalists, it's essential. It's we're the organizations that you can turn to find the facts, speak truth to power, and really kind of give you the information that the electorate needs to make informed decisions about their voting choices. And that drills all the way down, not just from the national level, but all the way down to the local school board elections. And that's where democracy really does thrive, and the importance of really maintaining those robust information channels is really essential, especially now more than ever, because that's where all of the real change is going to happen. It's not going to come from the top down. It's going to come from the bottom up. And I think a lot of the division and divisiveness that you see today is born out of the fact that small community newspapers, radio stations and television stations have just disappeared from our ecosystem, which is kind of flipped the model. We were talking about this earlier. It used to be like your day-to-day news consumption kind of agenda would be you would get a newspaper in the morning from your local community. You would listen to the radio station driving to work, and maybe even while you were at work, when you came home, you watched the local news, and then finally got to the national news, like the evening news. And I think we need to work really hard to kind of flip the model back, whether that's doing like volunteering at local news community organizations, financially helping support them, kind of in the way that NPR runs their fundraising models and different things like that. But like really taking local journalism and bringing it back to the communities that are going to use it effectively.
That works. Oh, nope. One more. Yeah.
You can share.
Hi, everyone. It's so great to see so many people out on a Sunday afternoon. So thank you. My name is Teresa Nelson, and I use she, her pronouns. I am legal director for the ACLU of Minnesota, and we are the state affiliate of the National ACLU, and our mission is to protect constitutional rights. And so the First Amendment is, one of those key constitutional rights that we fight to protect in the courtroom, in the legislature, in city councils, and in the streets. Okay. So we are a very strong champion of the First Amendment. And the reason for that, you've already heard other panelists say this, the First Amendment protections are really foundational. They play a structural role in our democratic system. And without having that protection, a lot of other things would fall by the wayside as well. And so when we think about some of the reasons for the First Amendment, ensuring government transparency, ensuring that the people can know and understand what our government is doing, ensuring our ability to come to community consensus about issues, our ability to protest, those are all really hallmarks and important elements of our democracy. And so we fight them every day, fight for them every day. And I've been at the ACLU of Minnesota for over 25 years, and we have always had, unfortunately, cases dealing with First Amendment rights. We see a lot of threats to First Amendment rights, and we've seen a lot in the past year, and we're going to keep fighting.
I will comment that freedom of speech is in the eyes of the beholder. A quote I have is, "Never again will the immense power of the state be weaponized to persecute political opponents." Anybody guess who said that?
No, Trump.
Who said it? Go ahead. Who do you think said
I
that?
thought it was Trump.
It was Trump. It was. And then a few months later, there was a memorandum. Terrorism task forces could now be focused not only on foreign terrorism, but on protest organizers, city officials, charities, and journalists whose views run counter to the administration's agenda. As you can see from those two quotes, how you interpret freedom of speech can change out of the mouth of the same person. And it's a complex issue in terms of what is free and what is protected. I've already had one question from the audience, which I think is a pretty good way to start off. And this question is there a responsibility to speak the truth? And I will also rephrase that and say, is there a requirement to speak the truth? Who would like to take that one?
I'm just passing.
Yeah, it's just not. I can talk from a legal perspective, which is to say that when you look at the First Amendment, the court has concluded that there are some categories of speech that are outside the protection of the First Amendment. Those would be things like obscenity, fighting words, true threats, things like that. Those fall outside the protections of the First Amendment. However, the Supreme Court has never held that false speech in and of itself, absent fraud or things like that, where you're using false speech to gain money or things, that is not a category of unprotected speech. And so the reason for that is that the courts really want to have, and the founders wanted to have, some breathing space to allow for robust debate. And they recognized that sometimes false statements are going to be part of that robust debate. And so I'm not saying go out there and lie. And that's not a moral judgment, but it is a judgment of the First Amendment and the reach of the First Amendment rights, is that sometimes we need to tolerate both false as well as caustic speech in order to protect full, robust debate.
I'm gonna get this to work. Hello? Okay. And I'm going to kind of springboard off of that and view it through the journalism lens. Like, absolutely, our credibility is built on truth. And I think with the advent of technology, social media, and the ability for individuals to kind of become their own publishers, the lines have blurred a little bit in that regard. And you're going to hear me throughout the entire day talk about the importance of local journalism. Okay. Yep. We're just going to switch. I think when the information that you get is being generated from local sources and different things along those lines, there's an accountability that you have within your own communities that you can call, like, you're even the watchdogs of the watchdogs. The way that the media kind of business model has evolved over the last 20 years is it's about getting the audience's attention. And so, like, elevating false statements and different things like that is, we call it clickbait, rage bait, different things like that, where I think the responsibility and onus of journalism today is to remove all of the opinion out of the equation. And that's kind of a divisive take within my own industry. People really loved the opinion pages in newspapers and different things like that. But I think that ship has sailed in the same way that classifieds has kind of left the newspaper ecosystem and different things like that. There are too many people out there that already have a platform for their opinion. And if we're trying to be the credible news source for our communities, there's nothing saying that we can't curate good opinions, but we shouldn't be generating them for our communities. We should be going out and finding and fact checking and holding other people's opinions to account and distributing those with all of the other factual information that we give to our communities, like I said, so that they can make informed decisions about their political choices and just living their day-to-day lives.
And I would add that in schools, that's why citing evidence and citing evidence from credible sources is incredibly important, and how to teach children how to do that. I think my deepest heart is as a kindergarten teacher. And if you ever want a lot of joy, talk to 25 5-year-olds about fact and opinion. I mean, it starts that young, and you have great debate about, purple is my favorite color, fact or opinion. They've got lots of feelings, but it really does start that young, teaching them to listen to each other, to discern information and not just see something and believe it. Think about today, young children today can see a photo and know it's AI generated so much faster than I can, because they're being taught to do that and discuss it. And that's going to become even more important as AI becomes bigger, more social media and all of those pieces.
Okay, fact versus what we assume, opinion. I can remember when my granddaughter, who lived with me, came home when she was in about 6th grade and decided that she believed in the flat earth. I don't think I ever had such a bad reaction to anything that she ever said. And she did lots of bad things. That one was so beyond me. I like, where is that coming from? But we do have climate change, people that are still deniers. There are still some flat earthers out there. So in terms of the difficulty to ascertain what is fact, isn't fact in the eyes of the beholder often? Comments?
I would say yes. And there's always multiple versions of the truth. And so part of your job working in public organizations like all of we do, is providing those multiple perspectives, multiple sides of a story, or absent narratives. Whose voice isn't being listened to here? Do we just accept the status quo truth, or are we looking for additional information?
This one's a little bit more nuanced for me, because I do believe that 90% of the time there are multiple sides to every story, but then there are 10% of that time where, even as a journalist, we should not be elevating a false narrative, even though it is, especially if we know it's a false narrative and can throw facts into the mix to prove that. I don't like if you're just taking the true definition of the word fact, then it is a zero sum. Like, it is either true or it's not true. And I think we need to kind of be reconditioning our brains to think in that way, to really delineate between what is fact and what is opinion. And I think a lot of people have been given permission to use, like, I hate the term alternative fact. Like, that's an oxymoron. It's not a real word, like, either this cup has water in it or it doesn't. Like, there isn't an in between. I mean, there is nuance. You could say this cup is half full or this cup is half empty, but like, a journalist will say this is a paper cup with about 3 ounces of water in it, you know, so that we can literally define what is sitting on the table. And I think as we've found as a community, like there are so many people that have agendas that want to pull us away from just basic truths, that we need to really work to kind of, like, journalism is a good start, but like we need to teach the community to be good journalists and also help us kind of course correct and fact check people as things are happening in real time.
I co-sign everything that these folks have said. I would add that if you look at the really the design and the purpose of the First Amendment and the reason, one of the most important reasons that we protect free speech and robust debate is to help us search for the truth, because there are so many different perspectives and there are so many things that, you know, the quote that you read from Mr. Trump, right? There are nuances and things like that. And if we aren't free to debate and question those truths and those facts that are being put out, then we don't actually find the truth and we don't arrive at community consensus, or, you know, we're forever kind of talking past each other. And so that is, you know, for political philosophers, when they talk about the First Amendment, they talk about, you know, one of the main goals or main things that it serves is to help us identify the truth.
And I had another thought, because like I think we also as a society conflate facts with beliefs. Everybody's entitled to their own opinions, but like when we have a belief, what creates that belief? And a lot of times that's lived experience, that's understanding the problem that's before you. And if you don't have the right information, you can come to an erroneous belief. And I really do think that that is what is also going to take a village is, you know, because like look at how Christianity has been weaponized in the political climate these days. Like some of the things that are being said out there and done out there fly directly in the face of everything that I had been taught growing up. And that's a belief system. And so like it's facts are affecting a number of different systems that we have across the board. And I just would love to be able to see us get back to zero as far as, can we all agree on what a fact is?
So whoever sent up this question anticipated what my next topic was, and that is hate speech. The questioner said, when and how can hate speech be regulated? But one of my favorite quotes, it's not really a quote, the title of a book written by Nadine Strawson, who was the longtime head of the ACLU, the title of her book was Hate, Why We Should Resist It with Free Speech, Not Censorship. Would you like to comment? We'll start with ACLU on this one.
Yes, I want to correct sort of a common misperception that I see a lot of times is people saying that hate speech is not protected. That is actually incorrect, and the Supreme Court has on many occasions said that, you know, again, hate speech does not fall outside the protection of the First Amendment. And so it is protected. And so regulating it gets more difficult. The general principles of First Amendment law say that when you regulate speech based on content, and so that would be hateful speech, for example, you have to have the least restrictive means of serving a compelling interest. So the government has to have an extremely strong reason for the regulation, and the regulation has to be closely tailored to that reason. And so hate speech then does become very difficult to regulate outside in the community. Now, there are contexts where there's a little more authority and ability. For example, in schools, right, every child has the right to attend school free from a discriminatory environment. And so in that context, hate speech that interferes with that right of a child to have a school environment that's free from discrimination, hate speech can be regulated. So for example, schools have banned display of the Confederate flag as a hate symbol, and courts have upheld that as being an appropriate regulation for the school. Now, somebody who has a Confederate flag at the mall, probably not. That would be a completely different context, but it's narrowly tailored. And so there are those situations where you can regulate speech that causes harm. The other thing is that sometimes hate speech is actually threatening. I'll give you an example of, I want to say the case is Virginia v. Black, but don't hold me to that because it's been a while. It's a case dealing with burning a cross in somebody's yard. And in that case, the court upheld a regulation because it was the intent to burn a cross in somebody's yard was essentially to intimidate. And the court said that was permissible to regulate. Now, back up about 15 years in Minnesota, in a case called RAV versus St. Paul, that was also dealt with a regulation prohibiting cross burning. But because the regulation prohibited cross burning for that was based on a specific viewpoint, the court said that was impermissible. And so you really need to have it tailored to what the issue is. And, again, the cross burning that was done for intimidation could be prohibited. And there's other, situations, if it's a true threat, for example, if it is harassment, all of those things that are, that are fueled by hate, those are things that can be regulated.
I would just add, as Terry spoke about in schools, that of course we welcome and encourage free speech until there is that level of disruption. And so in schools, we look at it bullying or harassment, threats of violence, major disruptions to learning, and hate speech that targets another. And that third one, the major disruptions to learning, is what obviously a lot of perspective and opinion comes into, but that's where we guide it as schools, is looking at, is this really disrupting the learning environment? So the flag is a perfect example of those types of things we wouldn't allow. And in my experience in Roseville area schools, people do not have a lot of struggles with that at all, whether it's in clothing or in school. If it shows up, it's quickly handled.
So what kind of things are the students told they cannot, for example, wear on apparel?
The Confederate flag would be one, a swastika, swear words. In Roseville, we have a pretty strong equity statement and that lists multiple identity markers. So if you're tearing someone else down based on gender, race, religion, ableism, socioeconomic status, any of those we would say would be creating that unsafe learning environment for someone else. So you can imagine the amount of graphic tees that sometimes come to school on kids. A lot of times they don't even know that it could be offensive to someone else. And so oftentimes it is that teachable moment, and then, they change and we move on with the day.
Sorting it out gets to be hard. I think of schools that have banned Black Lives Matter or Blue Lives Matter. I haven't heard of bans to All Lives Matter, but that might be out there too. Rainbows, so they can be banned. How do you make these decisions?
You're asking me? I think it's kind of what we've spoken to already, that listening to multiple perspectives. We have multiple policies and processes set up in school districts that involve listening sessions with community members that would also include student voice. The school board, where there's public comment, and our elected officials would be a significant piece of that as well. So it's about community engagement and then also what aligns with our district's mission and vision.
I'm going to move on to journalism. We've had some really amazing things happen regarding journalism and the media in recent months. I think I will start with Don Lemon, Georgia Forts, and other journalists who have been charged in federal court, which is a daunting thing to have happen to anybody, for their work where they maintained they were being journalists, but they went into a church during church services. This is a huge journalistic issue, and I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah. And we were kind of having a pre-meeting conversation about that. There used to be kind of a safety or a sense of safety from the First Amendment and the freedom of speech clause in that kind of pre-Operation Metro Surge. I think there's a lot of questions that have arisen since then. So there are some legal arguments on both sides of the fence in regard to, like, did the journalists know that this was going to happen? Were they part of the organization and different things like that? And unfortunately, this isn't a lot different than getting sued as a journalist. Like, people can make claims, and depending on what law enforcement agencies in charge of bringing forth those charges or civil suits, you will have to defend yourselves. I mean, I think the cases are going to get thrown out. I know Georgia myself. I've never met Don, but like, I've watched his career over the years. Regardless of where he is now, I think they were both operating in a journalistic capacity, and are going to be able to defend themselves pretty readily. And I think we've seen a lot of, I don't know, to use a Jurassic Park metaphor, the Raptors are testing the fences, and to see how far that they can push things, and which in and of itself is forcing journalists to kind of rewrite the playbook. Like, I work with student journalists, I work with professional journalists, and right now, a lot of my student journalists are coming to us and talking to us about, like, well, what do we do? How do we solve this? What's your experience on this? And I've said, I don't know more in the last 60 days than I've said my entire career. And the truth is we're creating a new playbook from scratch in real time. And unfortunately, I think it's going to involve a lot of lawyers and court cases. And I hate this term, but we are living in unprecedented times. But hopefully we are going to get to a place where we start creating new precedent to help us buttress the First Amendment and really answer some significant questions around some of the I won't call it loopholes, but just soft spots in things like hate speech and journalism and stuff. Because, like, fundamentally, the general public does not understand the full meaning of the First Amendment. Like, if you have a celebrity that gets fired because they've made a political statement, that's not a violation of First Amendment law. Like, they have a boss, they have an organization that pays their bill that has nothing to do with the government. And so they can basically say, like, you're values don't align with our company's values, goodbye, you know? And so like a lot of us conflate those issues. And I think moving forward, we really do need to kind of educate the public just as much as ourselves on where we can push back and how do we defend ourselves and how do we make sure that we're not losing ground in being able to give the public the facts. And this all goes back to truth and facts, because I think there is a lot of blurring of those lines. Thank you. And at the end of the day, like some of my students, some of the current professionals, like we're willing to go to jail right now for that type of thing, because if we have to have the fight, let's have the fight, you know, and let's get this solved, because more and more every day, public opinion is turning in regard to like the ways that trusted journalists are being treated, local community members are being treated, like just pillars of our communities are being kind of knocked around on a regular basis. I think that is transcending political division. It's just when we see neighbors and people like ourselves being treated in a way that we don't want to even see ourselves be treated, I think that is starting to resonate. And so I'm hoping that we're seeing a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, but I still think it's going to require some more fights before we get to I don't know, a general consensus, I guess. Oh, sorry.
I just want to put the prosecutions of Don Lemon and Georgia Fort in a bigger context, right? Because even before those prosecutions, we have been seeing sustained attacks on journalists, on members of the media. There was, you know, a police search of a journalist's office. That should not happen in a free society. Absent really extreme circumstances, which did not exist. But, you know, for me, I know the names LA Press Club, Chicago Headline Club. I know the names of those organizations because they have had to sue to be able to protect the journalists who are out in the streets trying to do their jobs and are being attacked and unable to do their job safely. And the same is happening in Minnesota. Our lawsuit entitled Tincher v. Nome includes a number of journalists and news organizations because we're also seeing those same kinds of attacks on journalists here. In 2020, both the in Oregon, and I'm blanking on the name of the case. It's one that, you know, we all really celebrate, but also here in Minnesota in our lawsuit Goyette versus City of Minneapolis, we represented journalists who again were being attacked when they were covering the George Floyd uprising, and they were being attacked by police and prevented from doing their job, prevented from being able to you know, report what was happening on the ground. And Charlie, something you said kind of resonated about how we, you as journalists, have a sense of safe harbors. And in Goyette, one of our journalist clients, Ed O, talked about, I was, you know, in a place that I thought was safe. It was behind a wall. It was in an alcove that was, you know, not in the main area where protesters and then police were. And when police started charging the line, they weren't charging at the protesters. They headed for the journalists who were in this alcove. And so we are seeing sustained attacks on those, and it is much bigger than those two prosecutions, which are also extremely chilling.
I'll expand this question to include media in general. We've had a lot of activity with the President of the United States suing people like the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times. The Associated Press is involved in a lawsuit because they were denied access to the Pentagon for refusing to agree by the limitations that the Pentagon was imposing upon them, which had never before that been done. The Federal Communications Commission is tangentially or maybe directly involved in terms of things like taking Jimmy Kimmel off of the air after comments he made about Charlie Kirk's assassination. This seems to be an intersection of big business, media corporations, the government, and it's affecting what is available to the public. Comments on this?
Hey, yeah, I think that we are seeing that, and it's very troubling. I think just as an example in my work, both when we wanted to file a lawsuit to protect journalists in Goyette, and in the Tincher case that we have right now, we struggled to find journalists who felt comfortable enough or whose employer would allow them to be a plaintiff, to sue. And so in Goyette, all of our plaintiffs, all of our clients were primarily freelancers. They were not with any particular news outlet. And so I think that does speak to the pressure that large media corporations have, both on their employees and their employee journalists, but also what they're feeling from the administration, and being willing to capitulate to and accept from the administration. You see AP suing, but you don't see other agencies suing, and you have various news agencies settling defamation lawsuits that frankly were fairly weak, in my opinion. It's my opinion. And so I think we have seen a lot of corporations, and a lot of law firms as well, kind of, trying to go along to get along and talk about the bottom line, as opposed to standing up to the kinds of threats to our First Amendment and our other constitutional rights that are happening right now.
And I guess I'm going to add to that too, where the activities in Minneapolis over the last couple of months has kind of changed that tone here in the metro, where competing news organizations are now collaboratively working together to make sure that all of the citizenry is being as informed as quickly and as effectively as possible. Is that going to be a long-term sustainable partnership? Probably not. There are business models involved in all of this. But right now, I do think that there is an opportunity to kind of shine a light on kind of really, as a consumer, sussing out what is an altruistic or a public service organization versus a corporate owned or privately owned company that might have an agenda that is predicated on its bottom line. I am a huge advocate for nonprofit news and community news organizations that are owned by the community, because you remove that kind of potentially toxic variable. And you're seeing it across the nation too, like the Spokane, Washington Review, private ownership by a billionaire, but that billionaire has put the paper in a public trust and is converting it into a nonprofit. I think you're going to start seeing more and more of those types of instances, or at least I hope we see those instances, because I think journalism and just I hate how journalism has been conflated with media, for instance. Media is television, it's all the TV shows that you watch, it's the reality shows that you watch, and movies that you consume, and different things like that. Journalism has a very specific purpose, and it's a higher purpose. It's a purpose to make sure that the community is not being taken advantage of, and from all levels of government, from local all the way up to national. And I think the sooner we can kind of all agree that that's an important, essential component of our democracy, the better off we're going to be. And unfortunately, I think some of this, like you're seeing a bounce back in some local markets because it's like that song, you don't know what you've got until it's gone. Communities have seen what happens with the absence of a local news source or a trusted local news source, whether that's radio, television, print, or now I still consider print like email newsletters and different things like that, websites and whatnot. Just because you don't have a paper that shows up at your door doesn't mean that the newspaper in town can't be the newspaper in town. I really think that we're seeing that growth and that opportunity starting to expand on a daily basis, because you've got institutions like Indiana has a strong nonprofit news ecosystem that's starting to bloom up in Indiana. Nebraska has the Nebraska Journalism Trust. The Texas Tribune is launched 2 or 3 years ago, and has been really, really robust in bringing more and more important news to the masses. And so, like, the neat thing about Minneapolis and Minnesota at large is we tend to be kind of on the forefront of those things as well. So, like, you're seeing things like the Roseville Reporter, Eden Prairie Local News, Woodbury Newsnet, Prior Lake News Compass all kind of pop up in the absence of that kind of news and information hub in their communities, and they're fighting really hard to build those things out.
Well, I'll just make a comment that the college-age students that have lived with me thought that Stephen Colbert was their main source of news. So in terms of how information is disseminated to people, I certainly respect and probably follow your definitions, but I think we have to remember that people are using media as a source of information, whether good or bad, and it has a whole different character.
Yep, you've touched on another thing that I'm very passionate about. Like, we have to get comfortable with news being platform agnostic or information being platform agnostic. We have the things that we like to consume news in, but like, if we have any hope of, rebuilding the infrastructure and the democracy of it all, we need to be compromising of looking at how our younger citizens are consuming and passing along information. You've got things like Instagram Reels, TikToks, YouTube Shorts, YouTube as a platform in general, Substacks, other digital newsletters, and different things like that. Things that we might not personally partake in ourselves. There is a whole information ecosystem out there that I would argue that just because a younger individual doesn't read a newspaper doesn't mean that they're not informed. And there are content creators and journalists out there that are just really reimagining the way to kind of penetrate into those audiences. Because, like, that's the thing that local news kind of lost, is its audience. Like, I can speak from experience. Like, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when the internet started coming online, the whole news industry was like my grandfather yelling at the clouds, like, well, I'm not going to change this. They need to, like, come along or get along. And they got along, like, without us. And that's one of the things that I think our news ecosystem really dropped the ball on all the way back then was we didn't really look at ways that we could work together with emerging technologies and new communication channels and different things like that. Like we were so ingrained and just it had been running so well for almost 80 years, and we got really comfortable with it. And unfortunately, comfortability like breeds complacency, and we're still like 30 years later trying to play catch up. And that's why I'm very open to any new platform. Well, I won't say very open. I will raise an eyebrow, but I, I have to take that leap of faith and trust my students and really ask them like, how are you getting this information? How are you getting this news? And to your point, you've got like the John Olivers, the John Stewarts, like comedy is a is a way to get good information to people in an efficient way. Like I would say that John Oliver's reporting team, Stephen Colbert's like writers and researchers and different people like that. To be fair, they're probably all former journalism students that couldn't find a job and just found a different, better spot in the world that pays them way better than we would ever be able to pay them because they are fact-based. Like if you like, and they're very transparent about it too. Like they show all of the receipts, they show all of their reporting, and so like, yeah, I never want to poo-poo somebody because they don't have a hard J or a capital J behind their name. Like I think there's a lot of space that we can hold for small J journalism in the world today.
And I would just comment that that probably extends to the influencers and even that, yeah, well, you've got that gray area. Where does somebody become a journalist? I mean, can I go down to the protest and put on a press pass because I'm going to write a little journalistic piece and hand it out to the 80 people that live in my apartment building? Is that okay?
I think, yeah. All right, we're getting into the thick of it. Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. And this gets back to the whole community of it all. Like the community needs to be there to support the community. And so like if you have a few, and that's the other thing too, that I think we're in rebuilding local journalism. I think we're still trying to paint it or construct it in the way that we lost it. And what I mean by that is like when I lived in Iowa and worked at Iowa State, the local newspaper had 200 employees. We're never going to get back to that because like 100 of those employees were like 100% devoted to the printing, distribution, and maintenance of the printing presses and all of this other stuff. So like you can just cut 100 people off of that staff right now, save a ton of overhead. And it's just reimagining the way that we're doing and creating this stuff. Like we can do it at scale, but with a much larger, lesser overhead. And with that said, we can't do it for free. We need to pay our journalists good wages, but we also need to involve our community. Whether that's with allowing volunteers to come in and do some like meeting coverage or note taking or different things like that. There's the Minneapolis and I'm hoping soon to be Minnesota Documenters program that's put on by City Bureau. And basically what it does is it trains local citizens to help journalism outlets get comprehensive coverage. So like we can go and take notes for you and post it on a website, and then journalists who couldn't make it to the meeting can go and write the stories that need to be written based off of the information that's been gathered. I think in the last 2 months, you've seen the observers. I think that there's a responsibility somewhere right now in the thick of it all. It's hard to kind of pull that out and extrapolate that. But moving forward, after the dust settles, I think all local journalism organizations should be having classes like Chamber of Commerce's and different things like that do citizens academies and kind of train people on like what it means to run the city and allow people to experience that. There's no reason that journalism organizations can't teach you how to be a conscientious observer and call it sand down the edges and like let's remove a lot of the authoritarian terminology around it. But like I think there's a lot of value in creating kind of a multi-generational newsroom that's made up of paid employees, volunteer employees, and just people that want to contribute back to their communities in a meaningful way. And I think you can capture some pre-professional work on the other end of that too, like really get into the school system. And a lot of student newspapers have been on the decline as well, just because resources aren't there because of funding cuts and different things like that, and school board decisions and whatnot. So like if you can't have a school newspaper, why not have a program at the community newspaper that involves students? I came up through the Boy Scouts, so like just different programs like that, church groups and whatnot. I think you can have a, like I said, it takes a village to kind of cover the community. And just because you didn't go to college to get a journalism degree doesn't mean that you can't be a journalist. Do you know how many Pulitzer Prize winning journalists there are in the world that didn't graduate college? Like journalism used to be a trade. It used to be something where you apprenticed at it. Like you might have been delivering papers, worked your way up, got onto the news desk, and then all of a sudden you're the publisher 40 years later. And there's nothing saying that we can't have the best of both of those worlds.
Now we're going to switch to a few education questions. We did a lot of great journalism, and there's more and more and more we could do, but I'm trying to pace this so we get a little bit of everything. Questions from the audience. One is, what limitations do schools place on teachers and staff in expressing their opinions?
Well, opinions is a pretty wide range. I'm guessing that they mean political opinions. As schools, we say your job is not to, like what I said at the intro, not what to think. So we're not sharing our own opinion. We're advocating for students to share their opinions. This looks very different with our pre-K, kindergartner, up to seniors in high school and adult learners. We do have systems across our English language arts curriculum that engages in discussion protocols. So really the teacher's job is to be the facilitator. This is different than it being in the curriculum where we follow the lead of student issues brought up. But again, I know this doesn't happen perfectly. I know I have certainly done it before, shared my own personal opinion when I shouldn't have as an educator. But in general, it really is about elevating the student's voice and helping them listen and speak.
Terry?
And from a First Amendment rights perspective, teachers speak in a number of different contexts. And when they are speaking in the classroom, it's really considered government speech. And so it is the curriculum that they are expected to teach. And there's not a lot of room for teachers to talk about their opinion only, or teach the curriculum in a way that is inconsistent with what the district has decided the curriculum will be. One example, there was a case in Minnesota where a teacher was a candidate for a science class, and he wanted to teach creation science and not evolution. And the school said, no, our curriculum is to teach evolution. We don't teach creation science. He sued, and the court said, no, you don't have a First Amendment right to teach something creation science in a classroom that deviates from the curriculum. Now, outside in the community, teachers have more First Amendment rights. They have a right to speak out on matters of public concern, and that's true of every government employee. You have the right to speak out on matters of public concern. There can be limits to that when your speech has a disruptive effect in the workplace, for example. And so there are times when the government can regulate that speech or punish you for that speech if you're causing disruption in the workplace. And so as a public employee, your speech is not 100% protected in the same way that it would be if you were a private citizen or a private individual, but you do have those rights. And then there's another, like a weird category of speech where if you are, if you're speaking on what's albeit a matter of public concern, but it is part of your job function, the government can also control that more.
Well, here's a hard one. In a local suburban school, the principal was quoted as saying that students making light of immigration threats or referencing ICE in ways that cause fear or humiliation shall be disciplined. How about freedom of speech for those students to express their opinions?
That's where we get into that. You're not creating a safe environment. And so talking to youth about freedom of speech isn't a free for all. You cannot do things that could be harassment or bullying, and that could fall into those if it was repeated and intentionally causing fear. So yeah.
I was just going to say, yeah, that seems pretty cut and dry to me. Like if a student had a T-shirt or that said "I support ICE," that's different than going at a student of color and saying like "I'm going to call ICE on you" or menace or use the words to menace and intimidate. Because like you do, and that's what I mean is we just need a lot more First Amendment education out there so that people really understand. But like there are always going to be people that push things to the limit and actually probably know the difference and still go the other way.
Yeah, I agree. The standard in schools, and this comes from a case called Tinker v. Des Moines. Mary Beth Tinker wore a black armband to protest the Vietnam War, and the court upheld her right to do that. But the court said that students don't shed their constitutional rights at the schoolhouse gate. However, the school can regulate speech when the student's speech is reasonably likely to cause a substantial disruption to the educational process or a material interference with education. And so, just like the Confederate flag, I could see situations right now where students who are wearing either ICE out or I support ICE, that in this moment and for the past month, I could see a particular school saying, actually, this is likely to be disruptive in this school right now. Maybe 5 years ago or 2 years ago or even 6 months ago, it was not disruptive, but right now in this moment it is. And so we can regulate that speech. Again, it's always depends on the climate in the school, the very individual circumstance of the school.
Are we about to lose this one too? I would just want to add like the very real fear present for many families and kids of even attending school. So it's not just the slogans or supporting something, but if another child were to say to someone, I'm going to point your classroom out to ICE, or ICE is going to be at your bus stop at the end of the day. That is intimidation and creating an incredible amount of fear because the fear has been real. So that's why we would say that would be disciplinary at this time.
As I recall my old constitutional law class, and you are an expert on this, I love it. Time, place, and manner count. We don't operate in a vacuum when it comes to freedom of speech. Now, a question from the audience, again, academically. How do you handle parental or community complaints when students want to stage a walkout? And how do schools guarantee student safety?
We have not dealt with this at all. Just kidding. Because we think about seniors in high school right now, our youth that are going to graduate this year, what they have been through, their whole educational experience, but particularly the past 5 years. So last spring, students were organizing walkouts about climate change. The first week of school this year, they're organizing walkouts about gun violence and school shootings. And now this, they've been through a lot. And that going back to, if we are raising well-informed, ready to advocate youth, then when they are planning a walkout on their own, when they're sophomores, juniors, and seniors in high school, I think that's great. So going back to what you referenced, that at the schoolhouse gates, that doesn't stop. We as educators are not planning walkouts. So this will look different at an elementary school, middle school, and a high school level based on students. So a month ago, there were 3 high school students at Roseville Area High School who started planning on their own, have been very vocal, cooperating with media about why they wanted to do this, and fortunately looped in Dr. Wilson, the principal at Roz, and the Roseville Police, because they knew there was so much interest and they wanted it to be done safely. So that's where then school staff get involved, is to ensure the safety of the students. If a walkout was planned by me or another staff, we'd plan it at the end of the day, right? 6th period is ending. No, these are teenagers with the sense of justice that they're going to plan it right in the middle of the day. We're going to be working with the police and all over, and that's their right. And we support that. And some people say, oh, staff went out with them. No, learning continues in the building, as I'm also a parent of 2 teenagers in that building. So I had to email attendance and make sure they knew why they were there. But it's something we do support as a democratic society. And when parents disagree with it, we are responding to student voice and enabling them to exercise their constitutional rights as well. We are never going to make every single person happy, and that's okay. But I think, like you mentioned, we do have the protection of the students' rights, whether it's in the middle of the school day or after school.
I could just chime in to say that, so from a technical hyper legal perspective, right, what the students are doing in this context is a form of civil disobedience if they are not following the attendance rules, et cetera. And what we have urged schools to do, because we've seen walkouts probably over the last 10 years, is to take it as a teachable moment with students, as opposed to simply punishing students for truancy or for skipping class, right? Take it as a teachable moment, because we are shaping our future voters. We are shaping people who are going to be running our country. And so we want to make sure that we have instilled in them this sense of civic responsibility and all of those things. And so I definitely applaud the Roseville district's approach to this. And there's a lot of other districts that are doing this well as well.
So I love seeing the ACLU and the schools being on the same page. It doesn't tinker. It didn't happen back then. Okay, now we're going to switch to chilling speech. And that's a comment that's used all the time in constitutional law classes when you're dissuaded from saying something, or there's a roadblock to your being able to express your First Amendment views. Questions from the audience reflect this. One of the questions is, Is the federal gathering of personal identifiable information of protesters a violation of the protesters' First Amendment rights?
Yes. No, could potentially be more complicated than that, but it is extremely chilling. And we have, heard a lot of stories of people who have been simply following an ICE vehicle, obeying the law and not violating the law and being led to their own homes, which is extremely chilling. We've also seen, collection of information, ICE agents telling people, I know who you are, I know where you live. And these are all intimidation tactics. And from the other question is, what are they going to be doing with this information? There are some principles of government privacy law and government information law that say you don't collect information unless you've got a legitimate reason to do it. And if the reason you're collecting this information is to create a dossier of people who have expressed dissent to your administration, that's not legitimate. That is not an appropriate thing to do. And that is what authoritarian governments do. You should not fear retaliation for engaging in First Amendment rights and engaging in dissent, or even simply observing and gathering information about what is happening. I think back to the Nixon enemies list, right? Like what is the list that we're going to see coming out of this administration? It's terrifying.
Another question from the audience. Could a panelist comment on DHS administrative subpoenas for copies of messages made by individuals who are criticizing the agency? I think in order to really answer this, maybe a description of an administrative subpoena. And again, we're going to our lawyer.
I'm going to start with the caveat that I don't practice criminal law. And so I can't give advice on criminal issues, but typically an administrative subpoena is something less than a search warrant. Oftentimes federal and state law enforcement agencies are authorized by statute to subpoena records from a third party. And there is a Fourth Amendment doctrine that kind of allows for subpoenas as opposed to a search warrant. So that's number one. But number two, I think the idea of, again, collecting information about people who are engaged in First Amendment activities is incredibly chilling and inappropriate. The fighting or challenging of those subpoenas really depends on where the records exist. For example, if somebody subpoenas Google for information, oftentimes Google will inform the person who is the target of the investigation so that they can go into court and try and quash that subpoena to say, actually, no, trying to get this information violates my rights. Not always. And internet service providers will often provide information without giving notice to the individual whose records are being turned over. And so that is, electronic privacy issues that are a little bit beyond the scope of what we're talking about here. But I think the bottom line question is, with these investigations, oftentimes I think they're probably not legitimate. And we saw a group of federal prosecutors in the Minnesota district who stepped down. They left their jobs. Think about what that means for them, because they believed that what they were being asked to do, including investigating Renee Good's wife and her speech, they left because they did not agree. They felt that was unethical and they did not agree with it.
And from the journalism perspective too, like this isn't all happening in a vacuum. So like I know a lot of organizations are switching email platforms, chat platforms, and different things like that. We've switched over to Signal Chat, so it's essentially an end-to-end encrypted chat platform where the data disappears. You can set the delete time on the data. We're also setting up all of our reporters and content creators we're moving off of the Google infrastructure because we know Google does comply with subpoenas to Proton Mail. And I think you're gonna see oddly some new tech companies pop up, just like the pandemic kind of birthed Zoom. Um, that deals with more privacy issues and data security issues. Will it be better? Don't know. All tech companies need money and government contracts and different things like that. So, not to be too conspiratorial, but like sometimes word of mouth, like we've even established some just word of mouth policies at the Daily that we're not writing down. We're passing it along in the oral tradition so that there isn't a paper trail. So like if if people show up at our office, we have a plan but there is no documentation of that plan at this point. And that's more to protect our students of color, our international students. And like I said, we're willing to fight and we're willing to kind of put up as many, I wouldn't call them roadblocks, but just we're not going to make it easy. We're not just going to let them walk in. And weirdly and unfortunately, like we don't know if we would be supported by the university at this point. And there are different administrative units throughout the metro. Like just because your school district is doing things in a certain way doesn't mean that others are not. And so like it isn't a one size fits all solution. And so we're all, like I said, creating the playbook as the game is happening.
There is so much to discuss. I don't even know where to go next. I will try one last question. Senator Mark Kelly and 6 other members of Congress there was an attempt, they were taken before a grand jury, the government was claiming that they were trying to incite, they were seditious for doing a video message to troops saying that resisting unlawful orders was their prerogative or maybe their duty. And there was quite a brouhaha about that. Would you like to comment?
Everybody knows I want to comment. I'm relieved that the grand jury did not indict them. Incitement is one of those categories of speech that the Supreme Court has said falls outside the protections of the First Amendment. But the definition of incitement is very narrow. And so, advocacy of illegal conduct, which they didn't do, number one, but advocacy of illegal activity does not rise to the level of incitement unless you are intending for people to carry out that illegal conduct and that illegal conduct is eminently likely. And so I would say if you are on Twitter and you say, we should all burn down the Capitol building right now, right? It's if you have like maybe 3 followers, it's not likely that you saying that is going to lead eminently to people converging to burn down a building, right? That's not incitement in that context. If you are in front of a very large crowd in close proximity to that building, and you have several small campfires around, that could be incitement if you've got a broader following. And so it's important to remember that simply advocating for illegal activity in and of itself is protected speech. And again, the reason for that is because our founders recognized we want to have wide breathing room. We want to have robust debate. And that means sometimes there's going to be caustic statements that most of us disagree with. And that's okay. We need to put up with that in order to help us with our search for the truth, et cetera. So I am relieved that they were not charged. I think, again, even taking what they said in the worst possible light, that they were advocating illegal conduct, which they were not, because they were saying, don't follow illegal orders, which is actually telling them how to follow the law and not commit illegal conduct. Even if we were to accept the DOJ's characterization of that speech, it is still protected under the First Amendment unless it's likely to cause people to violate the law.
Well, and I think there's a glimmer of hope or like a silver lining there too, because this is now the number of grand juries that have not taken on cases in the last 3 months has been astronomically high. Like the old idiom, like you can get a grand jury to indict a ham sandwich, just isn't. Maybe the ham sandwich has mayo on it now, but like the idea is that I think people are getting a lot more because of the noise and because of the activities. They're finding out information sources, and they're really trying to seek out and really find truth now. And that's where I do think, from a journalism perspective, like we have to capitalize on this opportunity and continue making sure that we're there for our communities so that they have that information at their beck and call. And can kind of clarify fact from fiction, from belief, and really make informed decisions moving forward.
Okay, I think last set of questions, I guess this is for everybody. We've had a lot of people in our communities that have become constitutional observers or protesters, or in the eyes of some agitators. Or criminals, depending on your viewpoint and depending on time, place, and manner. What happened? This audience probably has a number of people that have been active in these endeavors. And so how about a word of advice in terms of how people can help in the school community? What the journalists think about all of this with individuals out there, and what the ACLU thinks.
Thank you. So I'll say two things of how the community can support. The community observers that have been at bus stops across the district is probably the most heartwarming thing of this horrific past few months. They're using signal chats to communicate. We have all hot spots of the area, meaning like high apartment complexes, mobile home communities. So if you are part of that, please be part of that, and then don't do anything else. Because we also have had them called by name, followed home by ICE. So it's like we're really asking community members, pick your lane. If you're doing the community observing bus stops, do that, and we love you for it. I really do get a little teary each morning when I drive by Rice and then see the high school. It's so sweet. Okay, I said two things and then I went on a tangent. Huge surprise if you know me. Really, the other thing, I see at least two teachers who I've worked with in my career before in this room. Please thank a teacher. So many people, we are overwhelmed with the community support, and people want to do something. Send an email, send a handwritten note. Our teachers' hearts are broken. This has been so hard that uplifting words really do matter. So please, everyone in this room, do that for me. Tell someone else you know it does matter. The second thing is bigger, and it's the financial ask. We're doing a ton as a district right now with mutual aid support. There are certain things districts can do, food drives, hygiene product drives. That is going on, and we have a pretty robust delivery system. The next piece, if you are familiar with Do Good Roseville, Roseville Area Schools Foundation, they're working together to support a Roseville Rent Relief Fund for families. If you think about a family that had one working parent maybe in December, and let's say that parent has been detained for a short or a long time, they're losing all their income. They may have been able to cover rent in January. February got tight. Things are going to get harder for our families financially. And that's maybe Metro Surge is really done. I'll believe it when I see it. But the damage and the hardship that have been caused on our families is going to remain for a really long time. So write a note to a teacher. If you're looking to donate financially, look at Do Good Roseville, Roseville Schools Foundation. Thank you.
And from the journalism perspective, I think the constitutional observers just keep documenting. If you feel the need, pass it on to a journalist that you know or different things like that. But I'm here to tell you we're following all of you. And so like you may be contacted by a journalist, so like cooperate or share as much as you can. We don't want to put anybody else in danger, but like we can't be everywhere all at once at the same time. So it's really been inspiring to see the community step up in this kind of journalistic way. I think if you have story ideas, tips, or things like that, don't get discouraged if somebody doesn't answer your call right away. We're a little busy. And then from the financial, like, I feel like I'm copying and pasting what you said. From the financial perspective, absolutely like support your communities and different things like that. But like once the dust settles and different things like that, I would love it if you would consider supporting community journalism in some way, whether it's volunteer, whether it's financially, whether it's continuing to be an observer, or maybe we can figure out a different word for it moving forward. But like, I think this type of community involvement has been really inspiring, and it, I think, is like a lot of people tried to compare this to 2020 and George Floyd. This is the same but radically different, where that affected a very specific community, and I think we still all had strong feelings about that. This is affecting everybody, people we don't know, and but we still care about. And that's the neat thing about Minnesota is we're always going to be thinking about our family, friends, and neighbors, regardless if we know them or not, regardless of our political beliefs. And like, we're going to do right by our neighbors. So that's my advice there.
I would echo the statement, keep documenting, keep shedding light on what is happening. And even as the number of enforcement agents maybe leave the Twin Cities Metro, continue to document, because we know, and we last Friday, just 2 days ago, or was I? No, yeah, 2 days ago, we, exactly, I don't know. We submitted an amended complaint in our tincture lawsuit, in which we included an additional 80 declarations from people who had experienced retaliation by ICE agents while they were documenting, while they were observing, while they were protesting what was happening in their community. And we would not have been able to do that if people hadn't first reached out to us to say, hey, this is what happened to me. Here's what happened. In we've got a hearing on Tuesday, an evidentiary hearing in another case where we're challenging the way that ICE has been engaged in racial profiling and unlawful arrests. And in that case, we have approximately 30 declarations from people who've experienced that. Again, we could not have had those. We could not document and be able to tell the court what is happening and what rights are being violated without having that information, without having people do that. So my request to all of you and to the whole community is, if you are aware of those rights violations, we have a reporting form on our website. It's ACLU mn.org. If you get to our main page, there's a button right there that says rights violated by federal agents. You can click on that. If it kind of is a rights violation that involves people who are documenting, people who are protesting, there's one link. If it's about an unlawful arrest or enforcement activities, there's another link. And right now, I think our tally is we've received over 700 reports. And just for context, in a normal year, our intake system, we get about 1,200 requests a year. And so this form has been active for about 6 weeks. But keep bringing them, keep letting us know what's happening, because we can't assert people's rights if we don't know what's happening and we can't document it. So.
And that's a really important kind of point to end on too, is there are 3,000 of them and hundreds of thousands of us. And I think being there, seeing it, documenting it for history is going to be super important. And then share. Just share it with your community, share it with your own social profiles and different things like that, because we are, like I've said a couple of different times, writing the playbook, but this playbook is going to need to get scooped up by other states, other communities, and other organizations. So anything that we're doing here right now, I hate to call us a trendsetter in this regard, but like, I think we've proven that, we're not just going to roll over, and this type of conscientious objection works. So.
In closing, I want to thank our articulate, knowledgeable panelists for their time and their insights. I think it's helped us all. And in closing, freedom of speech is not free. We all need to get out there. We need to be advocates. We need to be voters. We need to be knowledgeable and informed through journalism. And we need to take action when action is needed. Thank you.